At 8:53 p.m. on the 31st of March 2023, the National Weather Service radar in Memphis detected a debris signature near the town of Selmer, Tennessee. It was a tornadic thunderstorm that had already been cycling through warnings for the past 30 minutes as it moved east across McNairy County. The storm was massive, its rotation tightening into a wedge shape on the Doppler display. Meteorologists at the local forecast office watched the velocity couplet sharpen. At 8:55 p.m., a confirmed tornado was on the ground, tracking directly toward the center of Selmer. The warning had been issued at 8:47 p.m., giving residents a lead time of just 6 minutes. The tornado sirens in Selmer had been activated by the County Emergency Management Agency at 8:48 p.m. Some residents later said they heard the sirens. Others said they never heard them at all. By 8:57 p.m., the tornado struck the western edge of town. The first structures it encountered were a mobile home park on U.S. Route 64. The damage was instant and catastrophic. Mobile homes were lifted off their foundations, rolled, and torn apart. A family shelter, a concrete block building reinforced with steel strapping, collapsed inward. At 9 p.m., the tornado crossed into the densely built commercial district along Mulberry Avenue. A grocery store lost its roof. The fire station was heavily damaged. A church built in the 1920s was reduced to a pile of brick and splintered wood. At 9:03 p.m., the tornado exited Selmer to the east, crossing into a rural area of farmland and timberland. It would continue for another 17 miles before dissipating near the Tennessee River. In those 7 minutes inside Selmer, the tornado had carved a path anywhere from a quarter mile to half a mile wide. What happened in Selmer that night was not an anomaly. The Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk for severe weather across much of the Mid-South earlier that morning. By late afternoon, a powerful low-pressure system was pushing a dry line across Arkansas into western Tennessee. Instability was high, wind shear was extreme. The ingredients were present for a significant tornado outbreak. The particular supercell that struck Selmer had developed near the Mississippi River around 7 p.m. and rapidly intensified as it moved east. The National Weather Service issued 10 tornado warnings during the storm's lifetime. The warning for Selmer itself was based on a combination of radar-indicated rotation and spotter reports from near the town of Mitchie, 10 miles to the west. But the storm was moving at 40 miles per hour. That meant the warning window was narrow. Every second mattered. The damage survey conducted in the days after the tornado classified it as an EF3 on the enhanced Fujita scale. Maximum winds were estimated at 155 miles per hour. The path length was 26 miles. The width peaked at 700 yards, but the numbers do not capture what the tornado did. It leveled homes. It snapped trees at the trunk. It stripped bark from trees still standing. It hurled vehicles into structures. It killed 9 people. It injured dozens more. Among the dead were 2 children, ages 7 and 9, who were in a mobile home that was obliterated. A mother and her infant died in another mobile home just over a mile away. The oldest victim was 74 years old, found in the ruins of his house on the outskirts of town. Emergency response began even before the tornado had fully lifted. The McNairy County Sheriff's Office dispatched deputies at 8:56 p.m. within 3 minutes of the tornado touching down. They were met with debris blocking roads, power lines down, and no communication from large parts of the town. The 911 center lost backup power briefly. Cell towers were damaged. Rescue crews from surrounding counties began arriving by 9:30 p.m. By midnight, a makeshift triage center had been set up in a parking lot near the high school. The local hospital, a critical access facility, treated 42 patients in the first 3 hours. 3 of them were transported by helicopter to Memphis. The Federal Emergency Management Agency deployed a mobile command unit the next morning. The Tennessee Emergency Management Agency coordinated search and rescue teams from 7 counties. What investigators found when they began reconstructing the event was a pattern that has become familiar in tornado disasters. The mobile home park where the most deaths occurred had been built in the 1990s, before updated building codes for storm shelters were adopted in McNairy County. A state law passed in 2011 had required all new manufactured home parks to include a community storm shelter within 500 feet of each home. That law had been amended in 2015 to allow local governments to opt out if the cost was deemed excessive. McNairy County had opted out in 2006. No community storm shelter existed in that park. The family shelter that collapsed had been built in the 1970s with concrete block walls that were not reinforced against EF3 winds. It was never intended to withstand a direct hit from a tornado of this magnitude. The warning system also had its failures. The tornado sirens in Selmer were activated by the county dispatch center, but the activation was done manually. The dispatcher had to click a button in a computer interface after receiving the National Weather Service alert. That process took approximately 90 seconds from the time the warning was issued to the time the sirens sounded. By then, the tornado was already inside the warning polygon. In a storm moving at 40 miles per hour, 90 seconds can mean the difference between taking shelter and being caught in the open. Additionally, the sirens were outdoor warning systems. They were not designed to be heard inside homes, especially homes with air conditioning running or televisions on. Residents who were asleep or who did not have weather radios never received the warning. The deeper question became how a storm with a 6-minute lead time could still kill 9 people. The answer lies in vulnerability. The victims in Selmer were disproportionately elderly, low-income, and living in manufactured homes. Mobile homes offer almost no protection against an EF3 tornado. Their ability to withstand wind is roughly equivalent to that of a car. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, mobile home residents are 14 times more likely to die in a tornado than residents of permanent homes. This statistic is not new. It has been documented for decades, yet the policy responses have been piecemeal and inconsistent. States have the authority to mandate storm shelters for mobile home parks, but many have not. Tennessee does not require community shelters for existing parks. It only requires them for new parks, and even then, the requirement can be waived by local governments. The aftermath of the Selmer tornado brought renewed attention to these gaps. The Tennessee General Assembly held hearings in April 2003. The National Weather Service reviewed its warning performance and concluded that the warnings were timely and accurate. The lead time for Selmer was within the national average of 8 to 10 minutes. The tornado warning skill score was high. The meteorologists did their job. The emergency managers did their job. The sirens worked as designed. But the design of the system had not accounted for the specific vulnerabilities of the people it was intended to protect. A tornado warning is useless if the person receiving it has nowhere safe to go. In the months that followed, a nonprofit group called the Tennessee Disaster Relief Fund began raising money to install residential storm shelters in McNairy County. The goal was to purchase and install 250 ground-level shelters, each capable of holding 4 to 6 people. The cost per shelter was approximately $5,000. By the end of 2023, the fund had raised enough to install 72 shelters. That is less than one-third of the target. The county also requested federal funding through the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program to build a community shelter at the Selmer Community Center. The application was approved in early 2024. The shelter is expected to be completed by early 2025, but the question that remains unanswered is whether any of this will be enough. The Selmer tornado was not a fluke. It was not the strongest tornado ever recorded in Tennessee. That distinction belongs to the 2002 tornado that hit Fayette County and killed 11 people. It was not the deadliest. That is the 1909 tornado that killed 59 people in Dyer County. But the Selmer tornado was a textbook example of how demographic factors, infrastructure choices, and warning response times interact to produce casualties. The same patterns that caused deaths in Selmer in March 2023 are present in thousands of communities across the United States. Mobile home parks are scattered throughout the South and Midwest. Storm shelters are rare. Warning systems depend on sirens that were designed in the Cold War to alert populations to air raids, not to tornadoes. What the Selmer tornado revealed was not a failure of technology. It was a failure of systems to match the reality of how people live. The Weather Service can detect a rotation 17 minutes before it touches down. It can issue a polygon warning that covers a specific neighborhood. It can push that warning to cell phones, weather radios, and television stations. But if the person who receives that warning is in a mobile home without a shelter, the warning is a static signal. It is information without an action path. The only safe action for that person is to leave the mobile home and go somewhere else. If there is no somewhere else, the warning becomes a performance. Investigators who studied the Selmer tornado noted that 3 of the 9 deaths occurred in homes that had been destroyed in a previous tornado in 2008. Those homes were rebuilt in the same location on the same lots without storm shelters. The county had not required shelters after the 2008 storm. The homeowners had not installed them on their own. The cost was prohibitive for most. The risk was understood, but the cost of mitigation was higher than the perceived probability of another tornado. That calculation was wrong. The story of the Selmer tornado is not only about what happened on the night of March 31, 2023. It is about what happens before a tornado forms. It is about building codes, zoning laws, insurance rates, and poverty. It is about how a community can spend decades preparing for a moment that lasts 7 minutes and find that the preparation was not enough. It is about the difference between a warning and a solution. At 9:17 p.m. on March 31, 2023, the National Weather Service in Memphis issued a severe thunderstorm warning for central Hardeman County and northwestern McNairy County. The storm that would produce the Selmer tornado was still 30 miles southwest of town. It was moving northeast at 40 miles per hour. The atmosphere that evening had been primed for tornado formation all day. The The Storm Prediction Center had placed western Tennessee under a moderate risk for severe weather by noon. The parameters were textbook: a strong upper-level jet stream, high wind shear, and dew points in the mid-60s. The ingredients were present for rotating thunderstorms. What was less clear was whether those storms would produce tornadoes and where they would touch down. At 9:27 p.m., the Memphis office issued a tornado warning for southeastern Hardeman County and northeastern McNairy County. The rotation was tightening. Radar indicated a debris signature beginning to emerge. The warning stated that a confirmed tornado was on the ground. It urged residents to take cover immediately. The warning was valid until 9:45 p.m. The tornado was already moving through open farmland southwest of Selmer. It was traveling at roughly 40 miles per hour. That gave residents in its path approximately 6 to 7 minutes of lead time. What happened in those minutes varied by location. At the mobile home park on Highway 45, some residents received the warning on their phones through the wireless emergency alert system. Others heard the sirens that began sounding at approximately 9:28 p.m. A few did not receive any warning because their phones were on silent or because they had opted out of emergency alerts. One survivor later told reporters that she had been watching television when the program was interrupted by a crawl. She did not understand what the crawl meant. She had never seen a tornado warning before. She was from Michigan and had moved to Tennessee 3 months earlier. She did not know where the shelter was. She stayed in her living room until the power went out. She survived by crouching under a mattress in the hallway. Her neighbor did not survive. The tornado entered the Selmer city limits at approximately 9:31 p.m. It crossed Highway 45 near the intersection with East Main Street. The first structure it struck was a self-storage facility. The metal roll-up doors were peeled open like paper. The contents of the units were scattered across a quarter-mile field. The tornado then crossed into the residential area south of the high school. It struck a row of single-family homes built in the 1950s. Those homes were wood frame construction with brick veneer. The roofs were removed. The exterior walls collapsed inward. One home was reduced to a slab. The family inside had taken shelter in a bathroom located at the center of the house. The bathroom walls were the only ones still standing when rescue crews arrived. The family survived. The tornado continued northeast and struck the mobile home park at 9:33 p.m. The path width at that point was approximately 300 yards. The wind speeds were estimated at 155 miles per hour. That is an EF3 rating. At that speed, a mobile home does not collapse. It disintegrates. The frame is typically anchored to the ground by metal straps. Those straps are designed to hold the home in place in winds up to 100 miles per hour. Above that, the straps can snap. When they snap, the home lifts off its foundation. It can roll, it can tumble, it can disintegrate into individual panels, insulation, and furniture. That is what happened at the park. The debris field extended for 3 miles to the northeast. Pieces of homes were found hanging in trees. Clothing was draped over power lines. Personal photographs were found in a field 6 miles away. An investigator later located a driver's license belonging to a resident of the park. It was found in a ditch near the town of Raymer, 12 miles from the home. The family shelter that collapsed was located 500 yards from the mobile home park. It was a standalone structure built by the county in the 1970s. The walls were concrete block. The roof was a concrete slab. The door was a standard steel security door. The shelter had space for approximately 30 people. On the night of the tornado, 23 people were inside. The structure was struck directly by the tornado at 9:34 p.m. The concrete block walls were not reinforced with rebar. They were filled only with mortar and gravel. When the wind struck the east wall, the pressure differential caused the wall to bow outward. The roof slab shifted. The east wall collapsed inward. The roof slab fell onto the people below. 8 of the 23 inside were killed. The rest were injured. The collapse was not instantaneous. Witnesses who survived said they heard a loud crack, then a grinding sound, then the roof fell. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. The question that emerged in the days after the collapse was whether the shelter had been inspected. The county building department stated that the shelter had not been inspected in at least 20 years. The original construction plans were not available. No one remembered who built it. No one knew if it had ever been certified for tornado shelter use. The state standard for community tornado shelters is set by the Federal Emergency Management Agency. FEMA P360 requires that shelters be designed to withstand winds up to 200 miles per hour and debris impact from a 15-pound 2x4 traveling at 100 miles per hour. The Selmer shelter had never been tested against that standard. It was built before that standard existed. The failure of the shelter raised a deeper question. How many other community shelters in Tennessee were similarly vulnerable? The Tennessee Emergency Management Agency began a voluntary survey of community shelters after the Selmer tornado. They identified 280 community shelters across the state. Of those, only 47 were built to current FEMA standards. The rest were older structures that had been repurposed as shelters. Some were basements in schools. Some were concrete block buildings constructed before tornado engineering was understood. Some were parking garages with open sides. None had been tested against the wind speeds they might face in a direct hit. The survey was completed in August 2003. The results were shared with county emergency managers. No statewide mandate for retrofitting was issued. The cost was estimated at between $50,000 and $200,000 per shelter depending on size and condition. The state did not allocate funding. The human cost of the Selmer tornado extended beyond the 9 deaths. 123 people were injured. 47 of those injuries were classified as serious. The local hospital treated patients for fractures, lacerations, head trauma, and crush injuries. The emergency room was staffed by 2 physicians and 4 nurses on the night of the storm. They treated 42 patients in the first 3 hours. The hospital had no blood bank. Blood had to be brought in from Memphis by helicopter. The hospital had no CT scanner. Patients with head injuries were stabilized and transported to larger facilities. 3 died after reaching the hospital. The total number of people displaced from their homes was approximately 200. FEMA provided temporary housing assistance. The American Red Cross opened a shelter at the Selmer Community Center. It remained open for 17 days. The economic cost was also significant. The Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance estimated insured losses at $47 million. Uninsured losses were estimated at $12 million. Many of the homes in the mobile home park were not covered by comprehensive insurance. Some residents had only liability coverage. Others had no insurance at all. The park was owned by a corporation that had not required tenants to carry insurance on the structure. The tenants owned the contents but not the home itself. When the homes were destroyed, the corporation received insurance payouts. The tenants received nothing. The park was rebuilt starting in August 2003. By December, 43 new homes had been installed. They were placed on the same lots. No community shelter was built on site. The county had again opted out of the state requirement. How could this have happened again? The answer lies in the structure of disaster mitigation funding. The Hazard Mitigation Grant Program provides federal money to states and local governments to reduce the risk of future disasters. The program is administered by FEMA. Requires a 25% local match. McNairy County had a population of 26,000 people. Its annual budget was roughly $8 million. A 25% match for a community shelter project could cost the county $250,000. That is more than 3% of its annual budget. For a rural county with limited tax revenue, that match is prohibitive. The county applied for a grant in 2022 to build a community shelter. The application was denied because the benefit-cost ratio was not high enough. The benefit-cost ratio is a calculation used by FEMA to determine whether a project is worth funding. It requires that the expected benefit, measured in avoided property damage, be greater than the cost of the project. For a rural area with low property values, the benefit-cost ratio is often below 1. That means FEMA will not fund it. The logic is economically rational. The outcome is that rural communities remain unprotected. The Selmer tornado also exposed a gap in tornado warning delivery. The wireless emergency alert system sends alerts to cell phones within a designated area. The system is based on cell tower coverage, not exact location. If a cell tower covers a 10-mile radius, the alert is sent to every phone connected to that tower. That includes phones that are outside the warning polygon. It also excludes phones that are inside the polygon but connected to a tower outside it. In Selmer, the warning polygon covered approximately 20 square miles. The cell towers in the area covered approximately 60 square miles. The alert went to everyone within that 60-mile radius. That included people who were not in danger. That also meant some people received the alert so many times that they began to ignore it. Warning fatigue is a documented problem in severe weather. When people receive false alarms, they become less likely to respond to real ones. The National Weather Service knows this. They are working on improving the accuracy of polygon-based warnings, but the technology for location-based alerts is still evolving. In the meantime, some residents choose to disable the alerts. That choice can be fatal. The broader context of the Selmer tornado is a pattern of rising tornado deaths in the United States. After decades of decline due to better forecasting and warning systems, tornado fatalities have plateaued and in some years increased. The reasons are demographic and geographic. More people are moving to the South. The South has a higher concentration of mobile homes. The South has a longer tornado season. The South has more nighttime tornadoes. Nighttime tornadoes are twice as likely to kill as daytime tornadoes. People are asleep. They cannot see the storm. Warnings must be audible. Not everyone has a weather radio. Not everyone has a phone that stays on at night. The Selmer tornado struck at 9:31 p.m. The sun had set at 7:14 p.m. It was dark. The victims were in their homes, preparing for bed or already asleep. The warning system that worked so well in the afternoon was less effective at night. The Tennessee tornado also raised questions about the role of climate change. The link between climate change and tornadoes is not as clear as it is for hurricanes or heat waves. The data shows that the number of tornado days has not increased significantly, but the concentration of tornadoes has shifted. The area known as Tornado Alley, traditionally the Great Plains, has seen a decrease. The area known as Dixie Alley, the southeast, has seen an increase. Tennessee sits in Dixie Alley. The conditions that produce tornadoes in the southeast are different. The storms are often faster moving. The storms are often rain-wrapped, meaning the tornado is hidden inside a wall of rain. The storms often form at night. The terrain is hilly and forested, making it difficult to see the tornado. These factors make southeast tornadoes more dangerous. Researchers at Northern Illinois University published a study in 2018 showing that the frequency of tornadoes in the southeast had increased by 30% since the 1970s. The reasons are not fully understood, but the trend is clear. The Selmer tornado was not the deadliest tornado of 2003. That title belongs to the Rolling Fork tornado in Mississippi, which killed 17 people on March 24th. The Selmer tornado was not the strongest. That title belongs to the EF4 tornado that struck Little Rock, Arkansas on March 31st, the same day as Selmer. But the Selmer tornado was the one that forced a conversation about systemic vulnerability. It was a tornado that hit exactly where the system was weakest. It hit a rural county with limited resources. It hit a population that could not afford to build shelters. It hit at night when warnings are hardest to hear. It hit a community that had been through this before. It asked again the question that no one had answered: how many times must a community be destroyed before the system changes? The first hearing on the Selmer tornado was held by the Tennessee General Assembly on April 12, 2023. The hearing lasted 4 hours. The director of the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency testified that the state was reviewing its shelter standards. The commissioner of the Department of Commerce and Insurance testified that the building code for manufactured homes was being updated. The acting director of the National Weather Service testified that the warning system had performed within parameters. No new legislation was introduced. No funding was allocated. The hearing concluded with a statement from the committee chair that the state would continue to monitor the situation. The second hearing was held on May 10, 2023. It lasted 90 minutes. The same officials testified. A representative from the Manufactured Housing Institute testified that the industry supported voluntary shelter requirements but opposed mandatory ones. A survivor of the tornado testified that she had lost her husband and 2 children in the shelter collapse. She asked the committee to require shelters in all mobile home parks. The committee thanked her for her testimony. No action was taken. The third hearing was held on June 14, 2023. No members of the public testified. The committee reviewed a report from the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. The report recommended that the state create a grant program to help counties build community shelters. The report estimated that the program would cost $30 million over 5 years. The committee voted to forward the report to the full legislature. The legislature adjourned for the year without acting on the recommendation. The story of the Selmer tornado is not over. The 72 shelters that were installed by the Disaster Relief Fund are in use. They have already been used during 2 subsequent severe weather events in 2023. The community shelter at the Selmer Community Center is under construction. The county has applied for a second FEMA grant to build a shelter near the mobile home park. The application is pending. The families of the victims have filed lawsuits against the county, the manufacturer of the concrete block shelter, and the owner of the mobile home park. The lawsuits are ongoing. The question that remains is not whether the Selmer tornado was a tragedy. It was. The question is whether it will be the last one. The answer depends on whether the lessons are learned and whether the resources are allocated. The answer depends on whether the system changes. The answer is not yet known. On the 28th of March 2024, exactly 1 year after the Selmer tornado, a memorial service was held at the site of the collapsed shelter. 78 people attended. The names of the 31 victims were read aloud. A temporary marker had been placed where the shelter once stood. The permanent memorial, a granite obelisk with a bronze tornado symbol, was still in the design phase. The county had budgeted $15,000 for it. The families had raised an additional $8,000 through bake sales and a GoFundMe campaign. The memorial was expected to be installed by the spring of 2026. The delay was not due to a lack of will. It was due to a lack of funds, the same reason the shelter had failed, the same reason the third hearing had produced no legislation, the same reason the community remained vulnerable. At 10 o'clock in the morning on the 28th of March 2024, the governor of Tennessee issued a proclamation recognizing the anniversary. The proclamation did not include any new resources. It did not mention the grant program recommended by the Advisory Commission. It did not direct FEMA to reconsider its benefit-cost analysis for rural areas. It said simply that the state mourned with the families. The families did not attend the reading of the proclamation. They were at the memorial service. They were standing on the gravel lot where their loved ones had died. They were holding photographs and flowers. They were trying to remember the voices of the dead. The governor's office sent a representative. The representative stood at the back of the crowd. No one spoke to her. No one asked her to speak. She left after 20 minutes. The legal cases filed in the wake of the Selmer tornado had been consolidated into a single multi-district litigation in the United States District Court for the Western District of Tennessee. The case number was 323 CV Wathrifer. The plaintiffs included 23 families. The defendants included the county, the manufacturer of the concrete block shelter, the contractor who installed it, and the owner of the mobile home park. The county had argued that it was immune from liability under the Tennessee Governmental Tort Liability Act. The manufacturer had argued that the shelter was not designed to withstand an EF4 tornado. The contractor had argued that the design specifications were not provided. The park owner had argued that the shelter was not required by any state or federal regulation. The court had denied the motions for summary judgment. The case was scheduled for trial in October 2025. The discovery process had already produced 28,000 pages of documents. The family's attorneys had requested the maintenance records for the shelter. They had received 3 pages. The first page listed the date of installation. The second page listed a routine inspection from 20Rosvin. The third page was blank. There was no report for 20Runite. There was no report for 2003. The shelter had never been inspected after installation. The county said it had not been notified that inspection was required. The manufacturer said it was the responsibility of the owner. The owner said he had assumed the county would handle it. The chain of responsibility had ended with no one. The shelter had been built and then it had been forgotten. On the 10th of June 2024, the National Weather Service released a post-season review of the 2023 tornado outbreak. The review was 47 pages long. It contained a detailed analysis of the 31 tornadoes that had touched down on March 31st. It included radar imagery, damage surveys, and warning verification statistics. The Selmer tornado was discussed on pages 22 through 26. The review concluded that the warning for McNairy County was issued with a lead time of 31 minutes. That was within the NWS performance benchmark of 13 minutes. The tornado was warned. The tragedy was not a warning failure. The review did not address the shelter failure. The review did not address the benefit-cost analysis. The review did not address the availability of public shelters in rural areas. The review concluded with a recommendation that residents in mobile homes should have a plan for seeking shelter in a permanent structure. The recommendation was not accompanied by any funding to build such structures. The review was sent to the NWS Southern Region Director. It was filed. It was made public. It was cited in a news article. It was then forgotten by most who read it. The broader context of the 2023 tornado season was a record number of tornado warnings. The Storm Prediction Center had issued 3,150 tornado warnings in 2023. That was the highest number since the SPC began keeping records in 1986. The false alarm rate was 71%. That was within the historical average. The average lead time was 14 minutes. That was also within the historical average. The total number of tornado deaths was 76. That was the highest since 2000. The average number of deaths per tornado was the highest since 2008. The tornadoes were killing more people even though the warnings were getting better. The reason was that the tornadoes were hitting more vulnerable populations. The tornadoes were hitting more mobile homes. The tornadoes were hitting more rural areas. The tornadoes were hitting more often at night. The statistics were not an anomaly. They were a trend. The trend was accelerating. In Selmer, the survivors had formed a support group. They met twice a month in the basement of the First United Methodist Church. The basement had been converted into a temporary community center after the tornado. The walls were covered with photographs of the victims. There was a whiteboard where members wrote notes to each other. One note said, "I still hear the wind in my sleep." Another said, "I don't know how to start over." The group had 34 members. 6 of them were children who had lost at least one parent. The group had a counselor who volunteered her time. She worked with the local mental health clinic, which had a grant from the state to provide trauma counseling. The grant was for 1 year. It had expired in March 2024. The clinic had extended it using leftover funds from another program. Those funds would run out in December 2024. The clinic had applied for a renewal. The state had not responded. The counselor said she would continue to see the group for free if the grant was not renewed. She said she could not afford to do that for more than a few months. She had a mortgage. She had children. She had to work. The economic impact of the Selmer tornado on McNairy County was still being calculated. The county had lost an estimated $27 million in property value. The county's tax base had shrunk by 3%. The county had spent $400,000 on debris removal. The state had reimbursed $200,000. The county had borrowed the other $200,000 from its reserve fund. The reserve fund was now at its lowest level since 2005. The county had asked the state for an emergency loan. The state had offered a loan at 2% interest. The county had accepted. The loan would be paid back over 10 years. The payments would come from the county's general fund. The general fund was already stretched. The county had laid off 2 part-time employees. The county had canceled a road repair project. The county had delayed the purchase of a new sheriff's vehicle. The economic ripples continued outward. The mobile home park where the tornado hit had never been rebuilt. The owner had sold the land to a developer who planned to build a storage facility. The families who lived there had scattered. Some had moved to other mobile home parks in the county. Some had left the county altogether. Some had moved in with relatives. The waiting list for FEMA's temporary housing assistance had been 47 families. FEMA had provided housing for 28 of them. The other 19 had been turned down because they could not prove they had lived in the park before the tornado. The forms had been destroyed. The park owner had not kept records. The families had no receipts. They had no lease. They had no proof. They had nothing. In the wake of the Selmer tornado, a small nonprofit organization called Rural Storm Safety Initiative had been founded. It was based in Nashville. It was funded entirely by individual donations. It had a staff of 3. It had a mission to install shelters in rural mobile home parks that could not afford them. The nonprofit had raised $80,000 in its first year. It had purchased 5 prefabricated steel shelters. It had installed 3. One was in a park in Hardeman County. One was in a park in Chester County. One was in a park in McNairy County. The McNairy County shelter was installed in July 2024. It was located at a park that had no shelter before. The park had 11 mobile homes. 40 people lived there. The shelter could hold 30 of them. It was built to withstand an EF5 tornado. It was inspected by an independent engineer. The inspection cost $1,200. The nonprofit had raised that money through a bake sale. The shelter had been used once during a severe thunderstorm warning in August. No one was inside during that event. The park manager said the residents were still learning to trust it. They had been told in 2005 that they were safe. They were not. They had been told in 2023 that they were safe. They were not. They needed time. The Federal Emergency Management Agency had responded to the Selmer tornado with a new policy memorandum on the benefit-cost analysis for public shelters. The memorandum was issued on November 15, 2023. It allowed regional directors to consider social vulnerability factors when evaluating shelter projects. The factors included poverty rate, median income, and percentage of mobile homes. The memorandum was described by FEMA as a temporary policy. Was to be reviewed after 1 year. The review was completed in October 2024. The results were not made public. The American Society of Civil Engineers had petitioned FEMA to make the policy permanent. The petition had been signed by 2,000 engineers. FEMA had not responded. The policy was still in effect as of November 2024. The Selmer County had applied for a new grant under the memo. The grant was for a shelter in the same mobile home park that had been destroyed. The grant was still pending. The county had been told by FEMA that the application was under review. The review had taken 8 months. The county had called the regional office. They had been told the review was delayed because of staffing shortages. The county had called the state office. They had been told to be patient. The county had called the congressional representative's office. The representative had sent a letter. The letter had been acknowledged. The grant was still pending. On the 4th of September 2024, a severe thunderstorm produced a radar-indicated tornado near Selmer. The warning was issued at 9:45 p.m. The tornado did not touch down. The police department activated the sirens. The sirens worked. The residents of the remaining mobile home parks went to the shelters that had been installed. The shelters filled. No one was injured. The next day, the National Weather Service conducted a damage survey. They found no damage. They filed a report. The report noted that the public shelter used by 22 people was a reinforced steel structure installed by the Rural Storm Safety Initiative. The report did not mention the 31 who had died in 2023. The report did not mention the shelter that had collapsed. The report was filed. It was one of hundreds of reports from the 2024 season. The story of the Selmer tornado is not a story of a single failure. It is a story of a system that was not designed for the people it was meant to protect. The system was designed for a world where tornadoes hit at predictable times in predictable places. The system was designed for a world where people lived in houses with basements. The system was designed for a world where local governments had the resources to build community shelters. That world does not exist anymore. The tornadoes are coming faster. They are coming at night. They are coming to places where the poverty rate is 20%. They are coming to places where the mobile home park owner has no insurance. They are coming to places where the county cannot afford to apply for a grant. The system has not kept up. The question that was asked in March 2023 is still unanswered. It will be asked again. It will be asked the next time a tornado hits a rural community. It will be asked the next time a shelter collapses. It will be asked the next time a family huddles in a bathtub because they have nowhere else to go. The question is not whether the Selmer tornado was a tragedy. It was. The question is whether the memory of it will change anything. The answer is not yet known. The answer is not yet known. But the question does not disappear. It hangs over Selmer like the storms that seem to come more often now. In the months after the tornado, the National Weather Service in Memphis conducted a service assessment. The team reviewed the warning timeline, the siren performance, the public response, and the shelter issue. Their report was released on July 12, 2023. It was 47 pages long. It made 9 recommendations. Among them, mobile home parks should be required to have a designated shelter or a plan to transport residents to a shelter. The report noted that the requirement does not exist. It noted that the cost of such a requirement would be high. It noted that enforcement would be difficult. The report was sent to the state of Tennessee. The state acknowledged receipt. The state did not adopt any of the recommendations. The reasons given were financial and logistical. The state said it would encourage voluntary compliance. The state said it would work with mobile home park owners. The state said it would provide information. The state did not provide funding. On September 15, 2023, the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency hosted a workshop in Selmer. The workshop lasted 4 hours. It was attended by 62 people. Among them were county emergency managers, fire chiefs, police officers, mobile home park owners, and survivors. The workshop covered severe weather safety, shelter options, and grant programs. The survivors in attendance asked questions. One survivor asked why the shelter in the mobile home park was not required to be inspected. The emergency manager said that inspections were voluntary. The survivor asked why the shelter was built with unreinforced concrete blocks. The emergency manager said that the building code for shelters in Tennessee did not require reinforcement. The survivor asked if the code would change. The emergency manager said that was a matter for the state legislature. The state legislature had not taken up the issue. The survivor said that 31 people were dead. The room was silent. The workshop continued. In October 2023, a group of survivors filed a lawsuit. The plaintiffs were 11 families who lost someone in the tornado. The defendants were the owner of the mobile home park, the manufacturer of the shelter, the company that installed the shelter, and the county government. The lawsuit alleged negligence, wrongful death, and failure to warn. The park owner had not maintained the shelter. The shelter manufacturer had advertised the shelter as tornado-resistant, but the lawsuit argued that the design was not suitable for an EF3 tornado. The installation company had not anchored the shelter to the foundation correctly. The county had not inspected the shelter. The lawsuit was filed in Hardeman County Circuit Court. The county government asked to be dismissed from the case, arguing sovereign immunity. The judge denied the motion in January 2024. The case was scheduled for trial in March 2025. The discovery process began. The defense lawyers deposed survivors. The plaintiffs' lawyers deposed engineers. The depositions revealed that the shelter had been inspected once in 2005 by a private engineer hired by the park owner. The engineer had noted that the concrete blocks were not reinforced. The engineer had recommended that the shelter be reinforced. The park owner had not followed the recommendation. The inspection report was not kept. The park owner said he did not remember receiving it. The engineer had retired in 2008. He died in 2010. His notes were destroyed. In November 2023, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, announced that it would conduct a study of the Selmer tornado shelter failure. NIST had not previously studied a shelter failure in a tornado. The study was funded by a congressional earmark secured by Tennessee's congressional delegation. The study budget was $2 million. The study period was 18 months. NIST sent a team of engineers to Selmer in December 2003. They examined the shelter debris. They took samples of the concrete. They tested the steel reinforcement. They interviewed survivors. They reviewed the construction drawings. The drawings showed that the shelter was designed to withstand winds of 100 miles per hour. The tornado that struck Selmer had winds of 150 miles per hour. The design standard was inadequate. The NIST report was released in June 2004. It found that the shelter failed because of multiple factors: the unreinforced concrete blocks, the lack of a continuous load path, the inadequate anchorage to the foundation, and the absence of a roof tie-down system. The report recommended that the International Building Code adopt new standards for tornado shelters in mobile home parks. The International Code Council received the recommendation. The council said it would consider the recommendation for the 2027 code update. The code update process takes 3 years. The Selmer survivors did not have 3 years. On Thanksgiving Day 2023, a small group of survivors gathered at the Pentecostal church in Selmer. The church had been rebuilt. The new building had a reinforced concrete shelter in the basement. The shelter could hold 200 people. The church had used a grant from the United Way to build it. The grant was $40,000. The shelter had been completed in October 2003. The church had opened the shelter to the community during severe weather. The Thanksgiving gathering was not about weather, it was about remembrance. The families brought photographs, they brought dishes, they brought chairs, they sat in a circle, they talked about the people they lost, they talked about the night of the tornado, they talked about the sirens, they talked about the darkness, they talked about the shelter that failed. The conversation lasted 3 hours. No one mentioned a lawsuit, no one mentioned FEMA, no one mentioned the code, they spoke only of the dead. The dead were 31, the dead were loved, the dead were remembered. In January 2024, the Tennessee General Assembly introduced a bill. The bill was called the Mobile Home Park Safety Act. It would require all mobile home parks in the state to have a tornado shelter built to the standards of the International Code Council. It would require annual inspections. It would require the shelter to be capable of withstanding an EF5 tornado. The bill was sponsored by two state representatives from rural districts. One of them had visited Selmer after the tornado. The bill was referred to the Commerce Committee. The committee held a hearing on February 15, 2024. The hearing lasted 2 hours. The committee heard testimony from survivors, from mobile home park owners, from engineers, from state officials. The park owners opposed the bill. They said the cost of building a shelter would be prohibitive. They said it would force them to close or sell. They said that many mobile home parks in Tennessee are owned by families who cannot afford a $100,000 shelter. The survivors said that the cost of not building a shelter was measured in lives. The engineers said that the cost could be reduced by building shared shelters for multiple parks. The state officials said that the bill would require a significant increase in state funding for enforcement. The committee voted. The bill failed 8-7. The reason given by the committee chair was that the bill was not financially feasible. The survivors who testified did not speak after the vote. They walked out. They did not look back. In March 2024, 1 year after the tornado, the city of Selmer held a memorial service. It was held at the courthouse square. A marble plaque was unveiled. It listed the names of the 31 people who died. The plaque was mounted on a stone pedestal. The pedestal was made of granite. It was 8 feet tall. It was designed to withstand winds of 200 miles per hour. The mayor gave a speech. The governor did not attend. A representative from the governor's office read a proclamation. The proclamation declared March 24, 2024 as Selmer Tornado Remembrance Day. The proclamation did not mention shelters. The proclamation did not mention the dead by name. The families stood in the rain. They held umbrellas, they held hands, they held photographs. The rain stopped after the service. The sun came out, the plaque gleamed. The names were etched deep into the granite. They would not wash away. In April 2024, the National Weather Service issued a new storm warning for McNairy County. The warning was for a severe thunderstorm capable of producing a tornado. The warning was issued at 7:23 p.m. The sirens activated. The sirens worked. Residents of the surviving mobile home parks were told to go to the new shelters. The shelters were full. Some residents had no shelter. They went to the church. The church shelter was also full. Some residents drove to the Walmart parking lot. They waited in their cars. The storm passed without a tornado. No one was injured, but the memory of 2023 was fresh. The anxiety was real. In the weeks that followed, more residents moved out of mobile home parks. Some went to apartments. Some went to houses with basements. Some left the county. The mobile home park vacancies rose. The park owners lowered rents. Still, the vacancies remained. The population of McNairy County dropped by an estimated 300 people between April and September 2024. The county tax base shrank further. The school district lost 12 students. The school board considered closing one elementary school. The school was on the west side of the county. It had 200 students. It was a brick building. It had no tornado shelter. The board voted to keep the school open. They did not have the money to build a shelter. They hoped the storm would not come again. In August 2024, the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance released a study of mobile home park safety in the state. The study was commissioned after the Selmer tornado. It was written by a consultant from the University of Tennessee. The study had 112 pages. It found that Tennessee had 762 mobile home parks. It found that only 211 of them had a tornado shelter. It found that only 96 of those shelters met the current voluntary standard. It found that the average cost to retrofit a mobile home park with a shelter was $150,000. It found that the state had no dedicated funding for shelter construction. It found that the state had no requirement for shelter inspections. It found that the state had no plan to address the problem. The study was presented to the legislature on September 10, 2024. The legislature took no action. The study was filed in the state archives. The archives are located in Nashville. The archives are climate controlled. The paper will not decay. On the 24th of December 2024, a Christmas Eve storm swept through West Tennessee. It was a derecho. The winds were sustained at 70 miles per hour. There were wind gusts of 90 miles per hour. There were no tornadoes, but the winds were strong enough to topple trees. A tree fell on a mobile home in Hardeman County. The mobile home was occupied. A woman and her 2 children were inside. The woman was 32 years old. The children were 6 and 9. They were in the living room when the tree hit. The tree crushed the roof. The roof collapsed. The woman was killed instantly. The children were injured but survived. They were taken to a hospital in Jackson. They were treated for fractures and cuts. They were released after 3 days. The mobile home park had no shelter. The park owner had considered building one after the Selmer tornado. He had applied for a grant from the state. The grant was denied. He had applied for a loan from a bank. The loan was denied. He had decided to sell the park. He had not sold it. The tree that killed the woman was a white oak. It was 70 feet tall. It had a root system that had rotted from years of drought. The tree had not been inspected. There was no requirement for tree inspections in mobile home parks. The woman's name was Maria. She had lived in the park for 5 years. She had worked at a poultry plant. She had no tornado insurance. Her funeral was held at the same Pentecostal church in Selmer. The church had a shelter. The shelter was not used during the storm. Maria had not made it to the church. She had not had time. In January 2025, the National Weather Service in Memphis updated its tornado warning system. The new system used a higher resolution radar and a machine learning algorithm. The algorithm could predict tornado formation with greater accuracy. The system could issue warnings up to 15 minutes earlier than before. The system was tested in a simulation of the Selmer tornado. It correctly predicted the tornado 22 minutes before it touched down. The simulation used the same atmospheric data that was available on March 24, 2023. The system did not need a spotter confirmation. The system was installed in February 2025. The first warning issued by the new system was for a tornado that touched down in Benton County. The warning was issued at 10:12 a.m. The tornado was on the ground for 3 minutes. It destroyed 2 barns. No one was injured. The warning gave the residents 10 minutes of lead time. The lead time was enough. The residents took shelter. The shelters in Benton County were mostly basements. The mobile home parks in Benton County had community shelters. The shelters were built after a tornado in 2010. The shelters were reinforced. They had passed inspection. They were used. They held. The story of the Selmer tornado is not a story that ends. It is a story that continues in the lives of the survivors, in the decisions of officials, in the amendments to building codes, in the grant applications still pending, in the waiting lists for housing, in the bake sales for shelters, in the memories of the dead. The question that was asked in March 2023 is still unanswered because the answer does not come from one event. It comes from a system that must change. The system can change. It has changed before. After the 2011 tornado outbreak, the National Weather Service improved its warnings. After the 2004 tsunami, the Indian Ocean Warning System was built. After the 2010 earthquake, the building codes in Haiti were revised. Change is possible. The question is whether the change will come in time for the next community. Selmer is not unique. It is one of hundreds of rural towns across the country where tornadoes are part of life and where the infrastructure to survive them is missing. The people of Selmer know this. They know that the tornado was not a random act of nature. It was a convergence of weather, poverty, outdated codes, and inaction. They know that the next tornado will come. They know that some of them will not survive. They hope that the story of Selmer will be remembered. They hope that the names on the plaque will be more than granite. They hope that the dead will not have died in vain. The answer is not yet known, but the hope endures. On the 1st of March 2025, a hearing was held in the Tennessee State Capitol in Nashville. The hearing was before the Senate Commerce and Insurance Committee. The agenda included a review of the consultant study from August 2025. The study on mobile home park safety. The hearing was scheduled for 10 in the morning. It lasted 2 hours. The committee heard testimony from the study's author, from a representative of the Tennessee Mobile Home Owners Association, from a trauma surgeon who had treated victims of the Selmer tornado, and from a woman named Deborah White. Deborah White was a resident of the Pine Ridge Mobile Home Park. She had lost her husband in the tornado. Her husband's name was Charles. He had been 63 years old. He had been a retired truck driver. He had been standing at the doorway of their mobile home when the tornado hit. The door was ripped from its hinges. Charles was thrown 50 feet. Deborah had survived in the bathtub. The bathtub was still anchored to the floor. She testified that the park had no shelter, that the owner had promised to build one, that the promise was never kept, that she had called the County Emergency Management Agency 6 times, that she had written 2 letters to the state, that she had received no response. The committee members listened. They asked questions. One senator asked whether a state mandate for shelters would be too expensive. Another asked whether the state should instead fund a mobile home buyout program. A third asked whether the problem was really a matter of personal responsibility. Deborah White answered each question. She said she wished her husband had made a different choice about where to live. She said she wished the state had made a different choice about what to require. She said she hoped the committee would act. The committee took no vote. The hearing was adjourned. The transcript was filed. The video of the hearing was archived. It is available on the Tennessee General Assembly website. It has been viewed 312 times as of March 15, 2025. What happened after the hearing? Nothing immediate. No bill was introduced. No funding was allocated. No regulation was proposed. The committee chairman issued a statement. He said the issue needed more study. He said the state could not afford to build shelters in every mobile home park. He said the state would work with local governments to identify voluntary solutions. The statement was released on March 5th. It was covered by 2 local newspapers. The coverage was brief. The story faded from the news cycle within a week. The residents of Selmer and McNairy County did not see a change. The shelter at the Pentecostal church remained the only public shelter within a 10-mile radius. The mobile home park vacancies continued to rise. The economy did not recover. The school board closed the elementary school in August 2025. The school was the one on the west side of the county. The building was sold to a private investor. The investor planned to turn it into a warehouse. The gymnasium was to be demolished. The gymnasium was the only tornado shelter in the area that had served 200 children. The demolition began on September 12, 2025. The wrecking ball struck the concrete block walls. The walls crumbled. The shelter was gone. The question of why the Selmer tornado matters is answered not by the event itself but by the pattern it represents. The pattern is rural poverty, aging infrastructure, underfunded emergency services, and a regulatory gap that leaves the most vulnerable without protection. The National Weather Service can predict a tornado with 20 minutes of lead time. That lead time is meaningless if there is nowhere to go. The building codes can require reinforced construction. That requirement is meaningless if the existing homes are exempt. The state can study the problem. That study is meaningless if no action follows. The hope that endures is not a guarantee. It is a choice. The people of Selmer choose to hope because the alternative is despair. They choose to attend the remembrance service. They choose to bake cookies for the bake sale. They choose to write letters. They choose to testify. They choose to believe that the next tornado will not find them unprepared. The evidence suggests otherwise, but the hope endures. It is the only thing that remains when the sirens stop and the silence settles over the broken ground. The names on the plaque are etched deep into the granite. They will not wash away. They will not be forgot. The question is whether the living will remember them in time.